In this video, we are going to be looking at that example essay, this time from more within the time frame of our curriculum with period 1. So I did want to give y'all an essay that involved material that you're familiar with from our lectures and previous assessments. It does, however, go back further to 600. So that is going to impact how this essay is written. So this is not an essay that I would try to, memorize and then use on any future essays, because we are going to actually look at some errors that are made as well. So first up, looking at the prompt, it asks us to compare and contrast. So that is our historical thinking skill. It is identified correctly here. And so on our rubric for my class, you would get an additional point out of 100 added on to make your final grade add up to a 100 if you identify the correct historical thinking skill. If you put contrast or if you put comparison or continuity and change, that would not be the correct historical thinking skill. So looking at what we are comparing and contrasting, we are comparing and contrasting gender relations between Western European Catholicism and Southeast Asian Buddhism, and family structure between Western European Catholicism and Southeast Asian Buddhism. Note, it didn't say Hinduism, right? It didn't say Zoroastrianism. It said specifically the religions that we are supposed to use in terms of addressing this question. So, were there similar gender relations between the two? Were there similar family structures between the two? Or were they different? So the first paragraph that we have is the intro paragraph. And the first thing you want to do in your intro paragraph is give background information. That can be from before the time period or after the time period and during the time period. Okay, with before and during being the ones that we try to recommend to students first starting out with essay writing. So, looking at their first sentence, you'll notice that I crossed it out because they are trying to do before context, but the context that they're providing is too far in the past. So patriarchal societies in which men tend to dominate positions of power and authority emerged as a result of the Neolithic Revolution around 8000 BCE. That is too many thousands of years before our time frame, therefore making it less relevant. Also, I want to note that patriarchal societies could be used as evidence in our claim. Now, we can't double dip. I can't talk about patriarchal societies in the intro and then move over to my body paragraphs and continue to talk about the patriarchy. That would not give me those evidence points. So I went ahead and marked that one sentence out. Then, as we move on to the next sentence, as civilizations became more urbanized, you'll note that I highlighted that in purple because urbanized means there's more cities. That's one of the terms that we've covered in our class and in our themes. So, as the civilizations became more urbanized, their populations increased and their cities increased. Religion played a dominant role in societal norms. So religion being important in society and how society was defined and regulated, right, with its norms and its laws and its values, we are emphasizing how important religion was in determining things like gender relations and family structures. We're not answering the prompt yet because we weren't asked to do cause and effect for why these gender relations or family structures exist in these areas. This is merely giving us context during the time frame. So in 600 to 1450 CE, this was the backdrop. Okay, religion was very important. Cities are increasing in size and number. In Europe, Catholicism spread. So if we use the word Catholicism and then just leave it at that, that doesn't count towards our outside evidence because it's in the prompt, right? Just like if you brought up gender relations, that would be in the prompt, and that's not necessarily answering the question. So in Europe, Catholicism spread following the split of the Roman Empire in 1054. Now they're referencing the Great Schism Okay, and this is within the time frame. So again, context during that time. You'll also notice that the Great Schism is not going to be evidence that I can use in my body paragraph. It doesn't have anything to do with gender relations and family structure, but it does have to do with context about Europe at this time. So if we just said religion was important in determining norms and relations and structures, okay, then we go into a discussion of how Catholicism developed in Europe that is relevant to the prompt. So Catholicism spread following the split in the Roman Empire in 1054 into two sects or branches of Christianity, with Catholicism in the West in Europe and Eastern Orthodoxy in the East. In Southeast Asia, heavy influence from China and India through trade led to. So we've covered Europe and its religious context. Now we're looking at Southeast Asia and how did Buddhism get to Southeast Asia. We know that Buddhism emerged in India, but it wasn't as popular in India. Instead, it became much more popular in China. And how does culture diffuse? Through trade and through conquest. So how did Buddhism get to Southeast Asia, the Spice Islands? China and India were their trading partners. So because of trade with South Asia and East Asia, Southeast Asia contained multiple religions, including Buddhism and Islam. Okay, so non-theistic means they don't have a god. So early Buddhism, the Buddha was not worshipped as a deity, right? They followed the Eightfold Path. The goal was to break nirvana and to stop the cycle of reincarnation. Later variations of Buddhism do develop deification or godlike worship of holy figures, but that's further down the line. While most of Asia experienced a golden age due to the influence of Muslim trade, okay, so Asia, trade, more money, Western Europe remained in the dark ages as trade networks and infrastructure decayed. So look at all of the specific evidence that they're giving us for what's going on during this period. Cities are on the rise. Religion is an important part of society. The Catholic Church dominated in Western Europe, and Southeast Asia had many different religions that got there through cultural diffusion of trade. We also see that most of Asia was in a golden age because of this trade. Western Europe, not so much. Things weren't going so great for Western Europe. They were not having a Baja Blast. So all of this is background information. It doesn't answer the question of how are they alike or how are they different in terms of gender and family. So this is not evidence that will be double-dipped in our body paragraph. So now that we've got the context, okay, even though their first sentence didn't qualify, okay, remember that we're looking for the preponderance of evidence. Did they provide enough, not what did they exactly do wrong? So it's either they have it or they don't have it. So moving on to the thesis. From 600 to 1450, despite their geographic distance and different religious beliefs. So here we're talking about causation, right? We're saying that they had some similarities despite geographic distance and the fact that they were not the same religion. So they're not in the same place and they don't have the same faith. However, they are going to have similarities in some contexts. This, however, is not going to be a body paragraph because it doesn't answer the prompt. The prompt asked for differences or similarities in gender and family. This just gives us causes or statements about them having different religions in different areas. Our actual thesis with its body paragraphs is going to be right here. So Catholicism and Buddhism shared what kind of gender relations? Patriarchal gender relations or roles. Okay, so they're not just saying they were similar in gender roles and they were different in family structure. Okay, they're making a specific defensible claim. So they are both patriarchal and families were dominated by the head of the family who was a male. So that can be a whole body paragraph there. Okay, how can we prove that they're both patriarchal and that they have male-dominated family structures? Now moving on to our other half of the historical thinking skill, how did they differ? They differed in defining concepts such as marriage and family size. So you'll notice I've made a claim that I have evidence for, but I'm not putting the evidence in my thesis. Now, what I mean by this is if I'm going to claim that Western Europe with Catholicism and Southeast Asian Buddhism, they had different types of marriage, I'm not going to put in my thesis they had different concepts such as marriage, where Southeast Asia practiced polygamy and Western Europe practiced monogamy. That's evidence that I'm going to put in my body paragraph, not up here in the thesis, right? The thesis is just telling the reader they made a claim, here's what they're going to talk about. So then, moving on to our body paragraphs, where we are going for our evidence and analysis points, the very first sentence is always going to be a topic sentence. Remember that we are following the acronym TEA. We need evidence and we need analysis. And you'll notice that I don't just have one TEA, okay? I also continue further, right? Here's more E, here's more A. Okay, so it can be multiple pieces. In fact, that's best practice. So in terms of gender roles, I already know what body paragraph we're going to talk about. We are going to talk about similarities in their gender roles. Western Europe and Southeast Asia shared culture norms that enforced a male-dominated society. For instance, evidence. Women in Europe were restricted in terms of education, employment, and property rights. So we're going to talk about the restrictions of women and how that proves that Europe was patriarchal. So while some typically wealthy women were able to join guilds, that deals with education and employment, and become artisans, which involves education and employment as well as being able to run a business, property rights, overall, the medieval code of chivalry at that time infantilized women, okay, treat them more as dependents rather than independent people. So it infantilized women as needing protection rather than practice and self-sufficiency. You'll notice that they explicitly define for the reader, this is what I mean when I say women are being infantilized, right? So you're going to have to pretend that the reader is not an expert in history and that they're not a mind reader. We can't infer what you meant to say, okay? We can only grade what is on the paper. Okay, so it's better to be more specific or even more obvious than you may think you have to be, just to make sure that you cross that threshold for the points. Women who rejected marriage in favor of becoming Catholic nuns retained or kept, so I'm going to circle that because our historical thinking skill was comparison, but we're also adding in another historical thinking skill, trying to go early on for that complexity point. They retained administrative autonomy or independence in convents, but this required a lifelong pledge of chastity and poverty. So basically they could maintain some independence, but it meant making some pretty big sacrifices. In contrast, Buddhist women enjoyed more independence than their European counterparts, aka women in Europe, in terms of education and employment, though still not at the level of men. So I'm comparing how both of these geographic areas were patriarchal, okay, but I'm also doing some analysis of slight differences, right, where women in Southeast Asia had more independence, okay, than the women in Europe, but despite that, both areas were patriarchal. Both religions claimed principles of equality of mankind, with the concepts of heaven and nirvana appealing to the poor, lower classes, and women. However, these ideas often failed to be reflected in their respected societies. Okay, so this is nuance. This is multiple perspectives. Okay, they claimed principles of equality. Okay, but when it came to reality, okay, we don't see that being fulfilled. Women tended to be resigned to home and hearth, their status dependent on that of the male head of the household. And while Buddhism rejected the caste system, geographic proximity to Hindu countries and the popular majority allowed for Hinduism's continuing influence in social structures that placed women in separate spheres from men. So here, another example of complexity. Okay, they are giving us causation. Why was Southeast Asia, even though it's Buddhist and claims equality of the genders, why was it still patriarchal? Okay, well, it had rejected the Hindu caste system, which was patriarchal, but how popular was the caste system in Asia? Extremely influential, extremely important. So Hinduism continued, another historical thinking skill, to influence this territory that was Buddhist. And that influence also tended to be patriarchal. So see, we're tying everything back to the topic sentence. The topic sentence said they are both male-dominated societies. Well, I need evidence to prove that that is factual. While Europe did not adhere to the Hindu caste system, feudalism maintained continuity, a social system in which serfs were tied to the land and a lord for generations. Thus, cause and effect, the social hierarchies of these cultures during the post-classical era maintained a tiered or leveled system based not only on class and wealth, but also gender. So even the feudal system doesn't directly relate to gender roles. It shows a comparison in terms of a very static society, okay, where there's not a lot of moving up in society, okay. So with this paragraph, okay, one single paragraph, they've got their evidence, they've got their analysis, they have more than 2 pieces of evidence just name dropped. I mean, look, medieval code of chivalry, nuns, convents, heaven, nirvana, the caste system of Hinduism, and then they directly connect it all back to their claim of they were both patriarchies. We also see the structuring of this paragraph under the historical thinking skill of comparison with additions of continuity. Now, is that enough to get the complexity point? You have an intro and a body paragraph? No. Okay, they're going to have to keep going. We're going to have to see that complexity and that sophistication throughout the entirety of the essay. So moving on to the second body paragraph. Next topic, we're moving from gender towards family. Regarding family structure, European and Asian cultures differed regarding marriage and family. Topic, sentence. The spread of Islam and Confucianism in Asia also spread the practice of polygamy, or marriage to more than one woman. So you'll note that when we give this evidence, these vocab words, y'all know polygamy has shown up on like 5 out of the 6 vocab tests or quizzes that we've had so far this year. It's like always there. Even though I know what polygamy is, okay, you as the author of this paper need to define your vocabulary. Okay, so if you said they spread the practice of polygamy, that is naming evidence that supports your claim, but you're going to want to describe it for the reader to show that you actually understand what it is and that you're connecting it to the topic. Catholic Europe strictly practiced monogamy and prohibited divorce. So, differences with marriage. Multiple wives versus just the one, and no divorce. With the Battle of Tours in 732, Europeans halted the Islamic Empire, the Umayyad in this case, so they didn't specifically tell us which Islamic empire, so that is a little vague, but just because they're vague in one part of their essay, does that mean they don't get points for being specific everywhere else? No, remember it's the combination of factors rather than just, oh, they did this one thing wrong. So Europeans halted the Islamic Empire from spreading beyond the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, thus ensuring, cause and effect, the dominance of Catholic religious practices. In South Asia, however, Buddhism existed in tandem, meaning in the same time, in the same place. Okay, so Buddhism existed with Hinduism and Islam. Although, contrast, Buddhism remained continuity in the minority. As such, causation, Buddhism did not boast the same cultural influence in Southeast Asia as Catholicism claimed in Europe. In terms of family, both cultures adhered to a male-headed household with other family members as subordinate to the eldest male, whereas the European household often consisted of parents and children, and if they wanted to be more specific, they could use our vocab word, nuclear families. Asian households often contained extended family members or generations. Despite religious and geographic differences, both cultures continued patriarchal family structures. So looking at this, looking at all of the circles in blue, and looking at the C's standing for another historical thinking skill, causation, comparison, continuity, and change, that is added in addition to the original one from the prompt, we see more than just a phrase or a reference, right? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So in both body paragraphs, they did all three of the historical thinking skills. So just to give you an idea of how we're going to score complexity, we needed 4 more pieces of SFI. We needed a topic sentence for each body paragraph, 2 or more historical thinking skills, and we typically want 3 body paragraphs or more. What else was there? Oh, yeah, nuance, multiple perspectives. So far, we've seen they've definitely got more than 4 pieces of evidence, and they've used it, not just name dropped it. They definitely have topic sentences at the top of each of their 2 body paragraphs. And it ties back to the thesis. They've definitely done more than 2 historical thinking skills. They did nuance. Okay, sophistication, looking at multiple factors rather than just one. The only thing they don't have is 3 body paragraphs. Okay, but remember, it's more about the combination of these features that determine whether or not you get the complexity point. So this doesn't count against them, because look at what they did here. Look at all the check marks. Okay, so we would reward them with the complexity point. So we've established thesis, context, 2 evidence points, because they've not only name dropped 2 pieces of evidence or more, they've also used 2 or more pieces of evidence to support their claim, and 2 analysis points. Because they not only used a historical thinking skill, but they also did all of this. Okay, that's for complexity. Another thing that helps is the fact that they have a conclusion paragraph. Now remember, that's optional, okay, because we already did these points, thesis and context, in the intro. Okay, so if you only have 35 minutes to write after brainstorming for 5 minutes, you're not going to want to lose time trying to come up with a conclusion paragraph if you've still got a bunch of evidence that you could use to get the other points. So there's the exact same points in the conclusion that you got in the intro. So it's technically not necessary. Does it help solidify your complexity point? Absolutely. If your thesis in your intro was too weak and I didn't give you the point for it in the intro, if I read this in the conclusion, okay, that could be a better formation of your thesis and thus earn you the point. So Western Europe and Southeast Asia developed urbanized civilizations that established a social hierarchy dependent on specialization of labor, meaning not everyone's a hunter and gatherer. Some people are merchants, some are artisans, some are farmers. With that hierarchy came patriarchal cultural norms that instituted specific roles for men and women. While both of these societies differed in terms of religious beliefs, their post-classical communities adhered to similar roles in terms of gender and family. Okay, now technically this thesis is not as strong as the thesis in the intro. Okay, maybe they ran out of time. Okay, the buzzer was about to go off, so they just kind of rushed through it. However, they did address and make a claim about comparison related to gender and family. So it would still qualify for the thesis point, but the more complex thesis was in their intro. So with that, they received 6 out of the 6 points on the College Board rubric. With the LAMP rubric, there's the grammar point. Now, if I were grading this, I would give this the grammar point. Okay, even though this first sentence here wasn't relevant for context, that doesn't have anything to do with the grammar. Okay, I didn't see comma splices, there were no contractions, they've indented their paragraphs, there were no sentence fragments. I mean, they did start a sentence with a conjunction right here, okay, but that's just one tiny little error. It's not like they just dropped a sentence fragment in there and went on their day. Therefore, this essay would earn a 7 out of 7 on the LAMP rubric. So there you have, in this lecture series, been modeled multiple examples of intro paragraphs, examples of essay cues being used as body paragraphs, and 2 essay student examples. Okay, one from the 2019 College Board exam with the previous rubric, and now with 2023, the new rubric with this last essay.